a moment for the band to step off the chancel. And let's just hear it for the band. Conductor Ray Patoda has been hailed as an inexhaustible dynamo with a deep commitment to reimagining the 21st century concert experience. So says Ray's official bio. Her vision can be seen through her thought-provoking programming, passionate allyship to marginalized artists, advocacy for arts education, and an unwavering commitment to presenting the music of our times. Her amazing success as the music director of the Fresno Philharmonic since 2017 has resulted in the extension of her tenure through the 2025 season. As a champion of today's living composers and as an artist that is dedicated to amplifying marginalized voices, Ray's innovative programming and disciplinary collaborations continue to position her as a leader in the industry. Highlights of her 21-22 season include presentations of works by Black, Indigenous, Hispanic, and women composers. You can see a connection to our Unitarian Universalist values in the heart and spirit of Ray. Two brief comments. I've been blessed in over 47 years of experiencing some incredible cultural and musical high points. And having lived on the East Coast, many of those were in some of the most celebrated halls in New York City. I have to say that on that March 2017 day when Ray auditioned, the sixth and last conductor to audition for the coveted title of Director of Music for the Fresno Philharmonic, was literally one of the greatest and most electric moments in my artistic and performing arts audience history. It was just magnificent. But it wasn't just that moment. She has sustained it through the last years, built up to, and as we just saw this May in the last concert. As I said earlier, Ray is the most embodied conductor I have ever experienced in any genre of music. She physically inhabits the music her orchestra is co-creating with her. Please welcome Ray to the pulpit.
Thank you, Tim. What an introduction. I'm so used to coming up on the podium with a baton, so this is very different for me. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. Originally, I was supposed to talk to you all 2 years ago, but of course the pandemic got in the way, and I'm so happy to be here today with you all. Now, as a conductor, I cannot do what I do without my orchestra. And I just want to take a moment to thank Larry Gardner. Yes, it's over there. For his many decades of beautiful music making for the Fresno Philharmonic. He just retired this past season, and we all will miss you very, very much, but lucky that for us that you will be performing us occasionally like he did this week in the education concerts that we did for 6,000 students, fourth grade students in Soroyan, and all of them have never gone to a classical music concert before, and all of them are from different parts of the city. So we're just really thrilled to do that. So as you can tell, I don't have difficulty speaking from the podium, but it is something that, you know, please forgive me if I'm rambling on today, but I'm really honored to share my thoughts and experiences with you. So the past 2 years and COVID has transformed all of our lives globally. and I thought I would talk about the word resilience. So I discovered this word resilience resonated deeply within me during the past 2 years, and most importantly, in my work as a conductor in the past few seasons. I started reflecting on the music and the arts and how that word resilience permeated the scores I was studying, the pieces I was preparing, the composers I was exploring, and all facets of my work. But the truth of the matter was, I was not working. None of us were. None of the musicians in my orchestra, globally, orchestras were not working. And this was frightening because this has never, ever happened to us, ever, and to this extent globally. So for almost a year and a half, we were all adapting and finding different ways to perform as artists, being resilient. So I want to share with you what I think how resilience relates to what I do as a music director of the Fresno Philharmonic and as an artist. I also want to incorporate the idea of resilience as reflected through the composers from Gustav Mahler to John Weinglass, and how conflict, the pandemic, and personal setbacks inspire these composers. The conflicts that compelled these composers and artists to create incredible works. And in conclusion, when we value the creative mind, great outcomes are possible, not only in music, but in our life experiences. I truly believe that as artists, we listen to do what we can, to build our audience, but also to reach people beyond the score through education, connecting with our communities, and recognizing our supporters, which include many of you here today. And to ensure that through these important partnerships, we grow as artists and strive to make the greatest impact possible on our world around us. So first, the definition of resilience. According to the New Webster Dictionary, resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties. In Spanish, the word, I feel, has a little bit of different connotation. La resistencia, which means strength, endurance, toughness. Some say in Japan, I'm Japanese, the Japanese has bred a cultural trait of resilience. And this has happened because natural disasters have happened so many times, which have pummeled the country, and they each time have to come back from this adversity from nature. There's a Japanese doll called the Daruma. I don't know if you're familiar with this big red doll that sometimes you see in stores. It's supposed to bring good luck. And the idea about this Daruma, which is basically a red face, is that it's weighted on the bottom. So you can rock it from side to side, but it never tips over. And this is the symbol of perseverance, of resilience. Throughout these past 2 years, my life as a musician, guest conductor, and music director of the Fresno Philharmonic have transformed dramatically, to say the least. I've had a lot of time to reflect on the effects of the pandemic to not only our organization, but arts organizations around the world. It was really difficult back in March 2020, Larry knows this, to even imagine today how far we have gone and transformed over the past 2 years. Being here in front of all of you, conducting Mahler's First Symphony on May 8th, it seemed like an impossible dream back in 2020 in March. But here we are, and I'm so grateful for it. But more than thankful, I have a new perspective on what I do and how I approach my work. I think we can all agree that through perseverance in our lives and through a different lens, we are really able to transform ourselves through this pandemic. Mostly, I believe my values shifted. First of all, the safety and health of my family and friends became the utmost importance to me. I remember the fear and trepidation of my daughter, who is now 10 years old, going into 3rd grade at that time, and shifting from online to in-person, my husband and I were completely tormented about her safety and the safety of others. Then, as soon as I found out that one of our musicians got COVID from the Fresno Philharmonic, I called to check on them to see how they were recovering. In fact, immediately I called all 72 musicians to see how each of them were doing. In those first 6 months of the pandemic, I made it a priority to connect with my players. To me, this engagement on a personal level has done wonders for our relationships on and off the podium, on the stage. Again, I'm so grateful for our connection, and it was something that I was not expecting to happen while we were apart, while we weren't able to perform together. And it took about 9 months to finally gather in person, have our safety protocols in place, to finally physically make music together. And that sound of the first downbeat of Tchaikovsky's Serenade, we were in Shikoyan, and we were only working with string instruments. I mean, I was weeping through my mask. Actually, I was double masked. So how glorious it was to feel and hear those live notes in person. And that connection was what I was missing terribly. And I thought we all felt that way on stage. And as I was reflecting about programming for the music of the Fresno Philharmonic and trying to figure out our future seasons through the pandemic, I thought about the word resilience again. We adapted and we went to digital programming, which I know that a lot of you have engaged in. Thank you for doing that. And we started with small ensembles, chamber groups, and solo. We did all kinds of things, interviews and online concerts. And it was a difficult time because our priority was to keep our musicians employed during this time and for us to stay in front of our audiences and this community. So you must allow me to take a few moments to thank our CEO, Stephen Wilson, who many of you may know, who really was instrumental in keeping the groundwork, the work going on ground here during that time. Yes. And then in May, after George Floyd's murder, subsequent riots, and social injustices, I was extremely affected by these events. I wanted to make it a mission to include many BIPOC composers and marginalized artists to the forefront, something I've been doing in programming. But for me, it became a mission. We highlighted these composers in our digital concerts with the Fresno Philharmonic. I interviewed these wonderful young Black composers in our Stay Tuned series and formed these connections again. It was extremely gratifying, not only to our orchestra, but to our audiences as well. And when you think about it, many past composers and artists have experienced terrible duress, whether it was a world war, illness, or personal suffering. And these composers use these experiences as vehicles to write the most amazing pieces of music. It was Simone Weil, the French philosopher and political activist, who argued throughout her life that knowledge in and of the world demanded rigorous, balanced thinking, even if that difficulty in measurement led the thinker to near impossible tasks. For her, these tasks were examples of synthesizing perspectives of religious doctrine for her, various traditions like Greek philosophy, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism. She believed knowledge was gained through suffering. That's an interesting perspective that seemed to be a thread in the output of these composers and their incredible works. How is a composer able to extract from within themselves amazing ideas for symphonies using form, texture, instrumentation, harmonies, melodies during a time of conflict and war? For instance, Shostakovich was under extreme oppression from Stalin, or within themselves, like in the case of Tchaikovsky with his sexual identity. What I truly find magical about these compositions is the connections we make with these composers, whether they're living or from 100 years ago. They still speak to us about their suffering, their conflict, and their ability to overcome and be resilient through their music. This is the connection I find truly amazing. So I want to talk about Mahler's First Symphony because we just performed that a couple of weeks ago. And Mahler said, "A symphony must embrace everything, be like the world." So he incorporates in his First Symphony philosophy, art, literature, and a shifting collage, an ever-shifting collage of emotions. And I don't know if many of us know that Mahler's music was actually banned and considered degenerate during the Nazi era. And when we think of these renowned composers, we often think of them and put them on a pedestal without really understanding their background. So as in the case of Gustav Mahler, his upbringing influenced his music profoundly. Mahler was not raised from a wealthy family. We know that his grandmother was a street peddler in Bohemia. Mahler's family belonged to a German-speaking minority among Bohemians, and they were Jewish. And from this background, the composer developed early on a permanent sense of exile. He always felt like an intruder. He never felt welcomed anywhere. His father was an innkeeper, and he married a 19-year-old daughter from a local soap manufacturer. They gave birth to 14 children. The first son died in infancy, and Gustav was the second son. Out of 14 children, only 6 survived infancy. So for most of Mahler's childhood, there would be small coffins exiting the back of his father's tavern business, while drunken patrons would come in through the front door. So Mahler finished conservatory without any awards of outstanding achievement. He enrolled at the University of Vienna, and after leaving Vienna, he became a piano teacher and continued to compose. Well, then he went into conducting. So that's kind of like me. I was a pianist, taught piano, and then went into conducting. And he wrote from a moment right away that he felt that this was what he wanted to do. And then a very famous conductor, Hans von Bülow, came to the court and gave 2 concerts, and Mahler was hoping to, be his assistant. Nope, did not get that job. But he did end up conducting the Leipzig Opera and was very successful at that. But as a conductor, which became his primary job, he was not popular at all with the orchestras he conducted. They resented him, and his rehearsals were very intense. So in 1888, Mahler sketched his First Symphony. In 1889, Mahler's father died. The following year, his sister died, and his mother. In 1889, the same year, he took custody of his younger brothers and sisters, all 4 of them. He himself was poor health. He had migraines, he had a heart tremor, and was having difficulty with his health. And then the premiere of his First Symphony that we just performed happened in 1889, right? All those difficult things in his life, he conducted his own premiere. It was a complete failure and a disappointment. The critics lambasted him. The audience got up and started talking during the 3rd and 4th movement because they were so upset about how horrible this music was. Mahler was very distressed because one of his very dear colleagues at the university remarked, like many conductors before him, had proved not to be a composer. Mahler's dictatorial style of conducting was resented, like I said, with all of the orchestras, and he was let go of many positions that he had held. And the anti-Semitic elements in Vienna long opposed Mahler's appointments and continued to attack him and instituted a campaign designed to have him dismissed. And this is when he had finished writing his Eighth Symphony, the Symphony of 1,000. Mahler, exhausted from the campaign, left Vienna and moved away. He had 2 daughters. Both of them fell ill with scarlet fever. Anna recovered and lived a very long life, well into her 80s. But Maria died at the age of 4. And this devastated Mahler. His wife said that his heart condition got much, much worse, and it was a death sentence for Mahler. So during all these difficult years, he was composing some of the most intense and glorious music. And the music critic Harold Schoenberg talked about Mahler's theme of struggle, and he said it was really in the tradition of Beethoven. However, according to Schoenberg, Beethoven's struggles were more of an indomitable and triumphant hero, whereas Mahler's were more of a psychic weakling, a complaining adolescent who enjoyed his misery, wanting the whole world to see how he was suffering. This is a 20th century music critic. Among other composers that Mahler influenced were Leonard Bernstein, Samuel Barber, and Vladimir Ashkenazy, one of my favorite pianists, said, the connection between Mahler and Shostakovich was very strong and obvious. Their music represented the individual versus the vices of the world. The vices of the world. When I think of the top vices of the world, human vices, the one that sticks out for me is anger. We've all experienced that type of anger that leads to hatred, revenge, extreme resentment towards others. This subject really came to a tipping point on May 25th, 2020. At the moment, a police officer in Minnesota murdered George Floyd during an arrest after a store clerk suspected Floyd may have used a counterfeit $20 bill. The African-American composer John Weinglass called me in early June 2020. So John is a very close friend of mine. I met him in Fresno in 2017 when I first became music director. He's a Californian composer, lives in Monterey. A bit background of John's work. His work, Unburied, Unmourned, Unmarked, is a requiem for rice, was dedicated to the lives of millions and numerous contributions of African Americans, forced laborers who cultivated the immense, expansive, and particularly wealthy rice economy in the Low Country. With a libretto by a historian from Carnegie Mellon University, this work took a team of researchers and filmed documentaries to the South Carolina, to the inner villages of Senegal and Gambia, and the world premiere of 6 movements with full chorus was in Washington, D.C., with conjunction with the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So he was a composer and artist that I wanted to work with. Now, back to that phone call in June 2020. He told me that he wanted to write a piece that really reflected his emotions, his anger about that incident, about social injustice. He wanted to know if I was interested, if the Fresno Philharmonic was interested in commissioning this work. I immediately jumped on this opportunity and encouraged him to write this work. His voice needed to be heard. We discussed the title and the idea behind the concept of it, like really the length of it and the instrumentation. And his wife came up with a title that inspired him. And it is called Alone Together. And the piece came together through a consortium of orchestras who all wanted to be involved in this composition. I called my friend who's the conductor of the Pacific Symphony, Carl St. Clair, and John talked to the Monterey Symphony and the San Jose Chamber Orchestra, and we all supported John's vision of this work. And it finally came to fruition. The Fresno Philharmonic premiered the work live and in person last October in 2021. And then in November of 2021, the composer John Weinglass announced that this work was to be chosen to be included in the Library of Congress, as part of the Collection for Performing Arts COVID-19 Response Collection. It included creative works and projects nationally by renowned creators, and it was a documentation to create during the pandemic. Again, the word resilience comes to my mind, and how these artists reflected and reacted to life-changing difficulties. These collections of scores and scripts and choreography I'm talking about the Library of Congress, were inspired by quarantine and pandemic works. Now a quote that I'd like to share with you from Klaus Schwab. He's the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum. The pandemic has brought far-reaching changes. In a world full of uncertainty and tension, personal dialogue is more important than ever. And I truly believe that. Having an open dialogue is more important than ever. Communication with each other is the key to bringing humanity closer together. The arts isn't just a space where we can appreciate and experience beauty. It is a space where thoughts and ideas are born and nurtured. Today, more than ever, I think it's important to have access to the arts, but not just to create an audience and build our audiences for tomorrow, but for building and sustaining the creativity that is so vital to our survival. So, thank you very much.